After my father-in-law's funeral, my wife inherited 450 million and threw me out. The next day, she called me in panic. I still remember the blue strobe lights washing over the warehouse walls, the way the concrete smelled like rain and rust, the way Sophia's voice cracked when she saw me tied to a chair, a strip of tape pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide and glassy in the half-dark. Daniel stood between us with a pistol dangling at his side, casual, almost bored, like this was just another family meeting, just another night in a life where power came easily and consequences never stuck. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile I used to ignore at holiday dinners, the kind of smile you only understand when it's pointed straight at your throat. "See," he said, as if he were giving a toast. When you pull on a string long enough, something always comes loose. Sirens bled into the distance, nearer, then far again, like the city couldn't make up its mind. I took one step forward, then another, hands shaking, breath-shallow shoes slipping just a little on oil and rain. And all I could think was, how did we get here? How did a funeral turn into this? How did love turn into a ledger? How did a home turn into a trap? 12 hours earlier, I was standing outside the Whitmore house with a suitcase I didn't remember packing, watching the iron gates close on a life I thought I understood. The funeral had ended with umbrellas and murmurs, a sideways river of black suits and black dresses sliding down the driveway toward expensive cars. It had been beautiful and sterile and merciless, a museum of grief curated by people who never touched the exhibit. The lawn was so green it looked painted. The roses were so red they felt unreal. And Sophia, my wife, looked like a statue pressed out of light and bone china. Her hair pinned her face, set her voice quiet when the lawyer finished, when the last clause of the will thumped on the table like a final verdict. 450 million, all to Sophia, and a trust stacked high with rules about how it could be used, where it could be moved, who could watch, who could whisper, who could sign. I watched her sign and I thought, this is going to change everything. But not like this, not like the way I was about to learn. We drove home in silence. The rain came in sheets. At the front door, she handed me a duffel bag, the zipper half open, a few shirts, a toothbrush, my passport. "I need you to go," she said, not even looking at me, staring at the glass, at our reflection, layered over the courtyard lights. "Just for now. I need space." I laughed, the kind of laugh you hear at 2 a.m. when your car won't start, a thin, empty sound. "Space," I repeated, rolling the word in my mouth like it could turn into something else, something kinder. "Sophia, we just buried your father." She swallowed, a muscle jumping in her jaw. "I know, Adam, please, just go." Behind her in the hall, Daniel leaned against the archway like a stain. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just watched, the same bored half smile stretched across his face, and it said everything. "I didn't fight. I wish I had. I wish I'd made a scene thrown. My keys asked whose idea this was, told her. I loved her, told her I wasn't going to leave, told Daniel to get out of my house. But I was tired and wet, and we had just buried the only man who could shut Daniel up with a single look." I picked up the bag and stepped into the rain. It wasn't until the motel room door clicked shut behind me that the anger came like heat behind my eyes, like a hand around my throat. I paced between the bed and the TV stand, stared at my reflection in the dark screen, and tried to stitch the last 10 years together into something that made sense. The first dates in old coffee shops, the wedding. Under a canopy of strings. Lights, the lease we signed on a cheap apartment with a crooked window. The overtime, the arguments about money, the quiet way I learned to read her moods, the flowers I bought when words weren't enough, the nights we stayed up late and planned a future that felt simple, almost ordinary. I lay down around 3 and didn't sleep. And then just past dawn the phone lit up. "Sophia." The first word fell out of her mouth like glass. "Adam." Her voice was wrong, small shaking a voice that belonged to someone who had finally looked down and seen the ground was gone. "What happened?" I said, already pulling on my jeans, already shoving my wallet into my back pocket. "I made a mistake," she whispered, breath stuttering. I signed something. Daniel and Thomas, I didn't read it, Adam. I was so tired. They said it was just a transfer, a temporary thing. The trust, it's not. The accounts are, someone is moving the money. It's gone. I think they're cutting me out." I had my shoes on and the door open before she finished. "Where are you?" She gave me an address, a cafe on South Harbour, a place with fogged windows and chipped tables, the kind of place where the pastries look better than they taste. I jogged to the car, breath-sharp rain cool on my face, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something that wasn't anger, wasn't grief, wasn't shock. It was purpose, clean and bright, hard enough to hold. Sophia sat in the back corner with her coat still on. When she saw me, she looked away guilty, like I'd caught her stealing. For a second, I wanted to punish her with silence, to ask if she liked the view from the other side of a locked door. But her hands were trembling, and her eyes weren't cold anymore, they were scared. "I'm sorry," she said before I could. "What I did last night, I thought I could control it. I don't know what I thought. I panicked. Adam, he's been in my head since I was a kid. And now Father is gone, and I thought if I drew a line, if I pushed you away, I could keep the house quiet, keep him from—" From what I said, sitting down, leaning in. "From this," she said, and slid a folder across the table. I opened it and found paper that smelled like toner numbers, stacked in columns, names I recognized, names I didn't. Wire transfers, nested LLCs, a chain of signatories that looped back on itself like a snake eating its tail. The timing was perfect obscene. One transfer posted less than 6 hours after the will reading. Another was scheduled for that afternoon. Sophia's signature sat at the bottom of a consent letter, not the trust document we'd approved months ago with her father, but a new attachment 2 pages dense and innocuous, delegating temporary authority to the executor, Thomas Avery, the family lawyer, in light of recent emotional strain. It didn't delegate, not really, it surrendered. "Thomas said it was routine," she said, voice fading. "He said he'd handle the paperwork while I grieved." I exhaled long and slow. "He's Thomas Avery, Sophia. He handles wolves, not paperwork." She flinched. "I know. Where's Daniel?" "I don't know," she said too quickly. "You do." She closed her eyes, shoulders curling in. "There's a warehouse near Pier 17. Father always hated that Daniel kept his friends there. They said I should come by later to sign a few amendments, something about estate taxes. I told them I'd call. I didn't call. I watched her breathe. I watched the way her hands couldn't be still. I remembered the night we moved into that first apartment, the way she'd balanced on the kitchen counter with a roll of tape and a cheap poster that kept slipping off the wall, and how she started to cry when it fell for the 3rd time, and how I laughed, and how the laugh turned into a kiss, and how the kiss turned into a promise, and how even promises can go quiet when you let fear speak louder. "Okay," I said, "we'll get ahead of this." "We," she repeated, eyes flicking to mine, hope and shame living in the same blink. "After last night, you'd still—" "I'm still your husband," I said, not because I needed her to hear it, but because I needed to. "You shouldn't have thrown me out, but right now I care more about stopping a theft than winning an argument." She nodded a quick, grateful motion, and then she did something that split me open a little, something small and human. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and her palm was so cold I could feel the chill in my wrist. We started with the obvious. Freeze what we could call who we had to. We needed evidence before we made noise, so noise couldn't be turned back on us. I left Sophia at the cafe and drove to a storage unit. I kept off the books for my odd jobs, the kind you never talk about in polite company. Inside, I had a battered camera bag, a pair of dusty binoculars, that belonged to my grandfather, a voice recorder, 3 dead phones, and a list of numbers I never saved under real names. I called one of them a cop named Ellis, who'd once been my roommate and now owed me for a weekend I never talk about. I didn't say family names, I didn't say money. I asked him about Thomas, about Daniel, about the warehouse on Pier 17. He didn't answer questions, but the way he blew out his breath when I said the address told me enough.
"Careful," he said. "You're not the first person to bleed there."
"I won't be the next," I said. Back at the cafe, Sophia had stopped shaking. A thin line of anger had found her spine again, not the kind she used on me last night. The other kind, the kind she used on brokers, who tried to talk over her, on cousins, who tried to take her chair at the head of the table. It looked good on her, and it hurt because I wanted to tell her I'd missed it. We drove to the harbour late, just before dark, when the air smells like a wet coin and the gulls get mean. I parked 2 blocks away and we walked along the fence, a rectangle of chain link capped with razor wire that glinted like a bad idea. Through the gaps I saw trucks, stacked pallets, a door propped with a paint can, a slice of yellow light on the ground. Daniel came out first, tying his tie, talking into a phone, laughing in a way that didn't have any humour in it. Behind him, Thomas Avery followed neat as a scalpel. His white hair combed his suit, pressed his eyes as blank as the contracts he loved to read. They turned toward the water, walking side by side, small and smug against the dark. Sophia's fingers dug into my sleeve. There she breathed. I lifted the camera, zoomed in, let the image sharpen until I could read Daniel's mouth. He said a name I recognized from the transfers, a Cayman entity with no office and a mailbox that never answered. He said, "Tomorrow morning, and final tranche, and she signs or she disappears." My stomach moved. I took 3 more frames, then turned the recorder on, then off. Careful, careful, careful. We circled the block and came back from the other side at a distance. Inside the open door, under a string of bulbs, men I didn't know flipped through ledgers and laughed. A folder sat on a workbench. Thomas's initials were on the tab. I took 1 step toward the door, another, and felt Sophia's hand pull me back. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, Adam." "Give me 20 seconds, I said. It took 12. I slid inside, let the camera hang around my neck. Like an apology, snapped the folder open, took the pages I needed, snapped it shut again, and stepped backward into shadow, so smoothly I almost believed in luck. We didn't talk in the car. Talking would crack the air and let fear spill out again. I drove to a friend of Ellis's who would notarize a set of statements without asking questions, and then we drove to a bank that would freeze any account with a whisper of impropriety, and then we drove to a courthouse where an emergency judge would listen for 12 minutes and sign for 4. We left with temporary injunctions that would slow the machine, not stop it, not yet, but slow it enough to give us a night, maybe 2. Sophia watched the paper move under the clerk's stamp, her mouth tight, her eyes dry, and I knew what she was thinking. You can freeze money, you can freeze a transfer, you can freeze a deal. You can't freeze a man who has never had to stop. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed. An unknown number, a man's voice, cheerful, the kind of cheerful that empties rooms.
"Adam," he said, like we were old friends. "We've been expecting you."
The line clicked dead. A text followed a pin drop, Pier 17. Sophia stared at the screen, then at me. "It's a trap," she said.
"Of course it is," I said.
"You're not going alone."
"I wasn't going to ask you to."
I called Ellis again. He cursed, then didn't hang up, which is the most love a man like him can show on a phone. "I can't be there," he said. "But if you make noise, the city will hear you. They'll send a lot of ears and a few guns. That has to be enough." It would have to be. Which is how we got to the warehouse and the gun and the look on Daniel's face when he realized the city was awake and the sirens were real and the world he lived in had at least one rule: he couldn't rewrite with a check. The door screeched open as we stepped inside, and 10 heads turned in unison. Daniel didn't. He already knew. He held the pistol like a prop, like a dare. He nodded toward a chair where 2 zip ties held Sophia's wrists. "One signature, sis," he said silky. "One signature and we all go home." She lifted her chin, and in that moment I saw the girl she used to be, knees scraped, eyes bright, daring her brother to push her off the dock, promising to pull him in with her if he tried. "I already signed something I shouldn't have," she said, voice steady. "I don't make the same mistake twice."
He said as if she'd chosen the wrong wine. "Then you make me do ugly things."
I took a step forward, hands up, palms empty. "Take me," I said, heartbeat drilling my ribs. "You're not scared of me, right, Daniel? Not like you've always been scared of your father, of your sister, of anyone who didn't clap when you walked into a room. Let her go. I'll sign what you want. I'll disappear. I'll give you a story that makes you look like a hero." He blinked just once, a flicker of surprise cutting across his face, and that was all I needed. Behind me, near the door, Sophia took a breath. I knew the sound of her breaths. The first time I heard them, there were fairy lights and cheap champagne, and a song we pretended to like. The last time I heard them before tonight, they were shallow and mean, the breaths of someone who had decided not to share air anymore. This breath was different. This breath belonged to a woman who had found a piece of herself she thought she'd lost. She kicked the chair back hard, splintering one leg. The zip tie around her right wrist loosened. She twisted, skin burning, plastic biting, and the tie snapped. Daniel swung the gun. I moved without thinking, the way you jump when a glass falls, the way you reach when a child stumbles. I grabbed his wrist, felt the tendons slipping under my fingers, slammed his arm into the doorframe once, twice. The gun clattered, spinning, skidding across the floor toward a stack of crates. Someone shouted. Another man lunged. Sophia was up, the second tie still clinging to her left wrist like a white cuff. She drove her shoulder into the man's ribs, and he folded, gasping. The sirens got louder, then louder again, until they were inside the room, bouncing off the concrete, breaking Daniel's poise like a mirror on tile. He spun toward the sound, toward the gun, toward a version of the night where he still had control.
He didn't.
Ellis had been right. If we made noise, the city would hear. And the city had a lot of ears. What happened next wasn't clean. It never is. It was shouting and running, and knees on necks, and red and blue swallowed by white. Thomas Avery tried to disappear between 2 pallets like a dog into a hedge. He didn't get far. Daniel tried to talk. No one wanted to listen. Someone tried to grab Sophia. A cop with a bored voice told him to stop. For once, a man like Daniel learned what it felt like to try to buy a minute and get change in handcuffs. I found Sophia in the corner, bent over, hands on her knees, hair tangled, the left zip tie still dangling, a little red line around her wrist, like a thread she'd used to stitch herself back together. "You okay?" I said. She nodded, and then she wasn't nodding. She was in my arms, small and shaking, laughing and crying, making a sound I'd never heard before, the sound of a person who realizes they still have a future. We spent the next week in rooms that smelled like paper and coffee. Statements, affidavits, account, freezes, criminal complaints. The news took what we'd done and turned it into something that could be consumed between weather and sports. It didn't matter. What mattered was slower, quieter, the kind of thing that doesn't look like a victory on camera. Daniel was charged, and Thomas with him. Their assets were pinned under a web as boring as the one they'd used to move money, and twice as strong. The warehouse became evidence, then a footnote, then a rumor. The accounts were dragged back to the trust, 1 0 at a time, like pulling pearls through mud. We went home. Home didn't look like itself. That happens when you see a house with your eyes open. The walls had always been white. Now I saw how white, how deliberate, how careful. The rugs were still soft. Now I saw the footprints we'd tried to smooth away the paths we'd worn through our lives without noticing. The kitchen was still perfect. Now I saw the meals eaten, standing up the arguments carried between rooms, the apologies that never got plated. Sophia stood in the foyer and didn't take off her coat. "I can't believe I threw you out," she said, like the words were a sentence she'd been avoiding and finally had to serve.
"I can," I said gently. "Fear is loud."
She looked at me, and for a second I saw the reflex, the comeback, the defense, the old dance. Then she closed her mouth and let the moment pass. "I don't want fear to run this house," she said. "Not anymore." We cooked. It was the only thing that made sense. We chopped garlic and overcooked pasta and burned the bread a little, and we ate with our elbows on the counter, and we didn't pretend not to be tired. "Do you love me?" she asked at the bottom of the second glass of wine, as if it were a trick question, as if I might say something that would break a spell. "Yes," I said, because love doesn't end on a doorstep in the rain, not really. Not when you've built it slowly in the spaces between bills and laundry and silence, but she winced. I deserve that word.
"It's not a punishment," I said. "It's a shape. We need boundaries, Sophia. We need a new map. We need to talk to someone who isn't us. And I need you to understand what last night did to me. Not the panic, not the danger, the part where you looked at me and saw a problem you could solve by making me disappear."
She nodded, eyes wet, not looking away. "I did that," she said. "I can say the words. I did that, Adam. And I am sorry, not because we got caught in a storm, not because you found a way back in, but because I forgot that love is not an asset I can secure with a signature. We did the soft, uncinematic work. We found a therapist who didn't care about our last name, who charged us the same as everyone else, who sat in a small office with humming lights and asked questions that felt simple until we tried to answer them. We learned how not to argue like lawyers. We learned how to apologize like people. We learned that the past doesn't retract just because the future is ready to sign a new deal. Some nights we slept back to back. Some nights we didn't sleep at all, and not in the good way. Some mornings I woke up convinced we'd done the wrong thing, that the cleanest solution would have been to walk away with nothing but a suitcase and a story. Some afternoons I watched Sophia in the garden, sleeves roll dirt under her nails, and I understood that grace looks like work. Daniel's case dragged, then sped up, then dragged again. Thomas cut a deal the kind that turns a wolf into a witness for a season. The press forgot us. The money sat where it was supposed to, large and quiet, supervised by a board. Sophia chose, not because they were family, but because they were competent. She sold the warehouse, the one no one had ever admitted was theirs, and donated the proceeds to a shelter her father had supported, a clean rectangle of justice that made no one rich and more than one person safe. On a Saturday, in late spring, when the air had just decided to be soft again, we drove to the coast without planning to. We walked the pier, the same pier where Daniel used to dare her to jump. She stood at the edge and looked down at the water and said, without looking at me, "I still see it sometimes. The moment I told you to go."
"I see it too," I said, "but I see what came after."
"And what is that?" she asked, a small smile sneaking in, the kind that knows it's not owed.
"Two people who didn't let the worst night decide the rest of them," I said.
A gull screamed overhead, rude and alive. Somewhere behind us a child laughed. The world kept going. It always does. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. We stood there, the wind tugging at our clothes, the water moving to its own math, and we let the silence have us for a while. When we got home, there was a box on the porch with no return address. Inside, on a bed of tissue paper, lay a single object, something you could buy in any hardware store, something that weighed almost nothing. A zip tie, white, the cheap kind. Sophia stared at it, then picked it up, then lowered it back into the box as if it were a sleeping animal. I watched the colour leave her face, then return slow and stubborn.
I'm not calling Ellis, she said, voice level.
I wasn't going to suggest it, I said. We won. Sometimes losers leave notes. She took the box to the trash and pressed the lid down. Not our story, she said, like a toast, like a prayer, like a boundary. That night, before bed, we stood in the doorway of the guest room that had become for a few weeks my room, the room where you go when you're married to someone you don't recognize for a while. The bed was made, the window was open, the air smelled like night. Do you want to keep it like this, she asked, not timid, not brave, just honest. Yes, I said, and the word surprised both of us with how gentle it felt. For now, she nodded. For now, she echoed, and the words weren't a threat, they were a promise to tell the truth again in a month and again after that, until the truth changed shape or didn't. We brushed our teeth, we turned off the lights. We lay down in the same bed and stared at the same ceiling and drifted into the kind of sleep you only get when you've earned it. The kind of sleep that understands that happy and sad can live in the same house without tearing it down. In the morning, I made coffee. She made pancakes that were too thin and burned at the edges the way she always makes them when she forgets to watch the pan. We ate, standing up, elbows on the counterplates balanced on the sink, sunlight turning the floor into clean squares. I'm choosing you, she said finally, a simple sentence that sounded like a choir. I'm choosing you back, I said. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We put the plates in the sink and let the water run and let the day begin. It wasn't perfect, it was ours. And if that means some nights we sleep with the door to the guest room open, if that means some weekends we go to therapy instead of brunch, if that means some holidays come without invitations because we mailed the wrong people to jail, then fine. We can live in a house that has room for boundaries. Sometimes when it's late and the part of my brain that loves to sabotage starts whispering, I still see the warehouse, the gun, the look on Daniel's face when he realized the story wasn't going to end the way he'd written it. And then I see what came after the papers, and the pancakes and the pier, and the way Sophia said for now and meant it, and how for now can be holy if you honor it every morning. That's the life we have, not the fantasy people think 450 million buys, not the nightmare it almost became, but something humbler, heavier, and more useful. A house where money sits still, where love wears work clothes, where apologies and boundaries live in the same drawer, where we choose each other and then prove it one quiet, ordinary, stubborn day at a time.